Spider-Man has to be one of the highest regarded comic book characters of all time. Over the years, there have been countless of adaptations of the web-slinging hero, from TV shows to movies to even a failed Broadway show. There have also been many animated TV shows over the years, but the most underrated of them all has to be the short-lived Spectacular Spider-Man from 2008 to 2009. A show that garnished critical acclaim and viewer approval for pushing new boundaries for Spider-Man and really speaking up to its audience. Unfortunately, the show was cancelled due to a failed battle for the rights from Marvel and Sony to continue the series. That said though, the show is still well regarded to this day and has been declared not just one of the best Spider-Man shows, but one of the greatest animated TV shows of all time. So, what do I think of the only 2 completed seasons of the show? To start off, the general series is more of a mix of classic Spider-Man from Peter Parker's beginnings from when he first became Spider-Man, and some fairly recent comics at the time. The first season features Peter Parker in his junior year in high school with his 2 best friends, Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy, after being bitten by the radioactive spider, thus forming his powers and alias as Spider-Man. After the death of his Uncle Ben and needing support for his Aunt May, Peter gets hired as a freelance photographer at the Daily Bugle by getting pictures of his alter ego in action in order to gain a small campaign against Spider-Man that soon turns New York City against the hero. Peter and Gwen are also given junior lab assistant positions under Dr. Kirk Connors at Empire State University, along with Peter's childhood friend Eddie Brock as their mentor. As Spider-Man keeps crime ridden from the streets with his powers, the big man notices and decides to orchestrate crime by driving the hero to fight with the Enforcers, Vulture, Electro, and the Lizard. With the help of Norman Osborn, Chief Scientist Dr. Otto Octavius, and Criminal Hammerhead, the big man begins a development on a project to create supervillains made to distract Spider-Man from other crimes and stop damaging his profits, including petty criminals like Sandman and Rhino. However, the big man's plans have become greatly complicated when a mysterious Green Goblin enters the picture. As for Season 2, Peter Parker's life gets more and more complicated when he not only continues solving crime and gang-driven activity from the big man, but becomes torn between Gwen Stacy and Liz Allen, who both have confessed their feelings for him, but soon chooses Liz. Norman Osborn soon becomes Peter's mentor, giving him confidence to re-establish his job as Dr. Connor's lab assistant that he was originally fired from due to losing a symbiote, and inspecting the installment of Dr. Miles Warren into the ESU labs. Meanwhile, Peter and his Spider-Man alias confronts new villains such as Mysterio and Kraven the Hunter, which brings him to discover a mysterious new crime lord known as the Master Planner. When the Master Planner's first scheme fails, Spider-Man is faced with a 3-way gang war between the Planner's supervillain forces, the Big Man's established order, and the old guard of Silvio Silvermane Manfredi's family. Also, Peter's search for Eddie Brock brings him to the return of the symbiote, now taking control of Eddie himself as Venom, who attempts to expose Spider-Man's secret identity and strip him of all his powers. Finally, after all the 3 major crime lords are arrested and Eddie is defeated and sent away for medical help, Spider-Man once again goes up against the Green Goblin, who is once again bent on eliminating the wall crawler once and for all. Now, with the plot mentioned, the real meat of the series' premise revolves around these conflicts, which makes it a case of biting off more than one can chew. Peter Parker becomes one of the most complex characters in animation I've ever seen, due to his life on crime as Spider-Man counterfeiting with his personal life as a junior in high school and taking care of his widowed Aunt May. He not only has to protect his secret identity from everyone and remain responsible for his powers, but he must also make sure to keep his friends and loved ones from finding out. It becomes so suspenseful throughout the show, and it always knows how to leave the audience in a state of anticipation, wondering what will happen to the web-slinging teen hero. There's also the factor of Peter eventually getting into a love mess-up with Gwen Stacy and Liz Allen, which is honestly pretty cliched every now and then, but then gets really emotional when he has to toggle between his superhero life and real life. The fact that somebody with all those responsibilities, let alone a teenager, can pull all those off with a few slip-ups is quite an accomplishment, thus giving Peter Parker a real character complex with a lot of heart, determination, worries, snarky comebacks, and even will. But he always knows to keep in mind the quote from his Uncle Ben: "With great power comes great responsibility," as it plays a key role in Spider-Man's philosophy, and you must never let it go when you're faced with the responsibility of being a superhero. As for the supporting cast, oh boy do we have a mouthful to get to, as many of these characters start off as your average high school kids, but then grow more and more as characters as the series goes on. There's Peter's best friend Gwen Stacy, who initially harbors deep feelings for Peter with strong will and kindness down to soon having a crush on him, but also well-meaning concern for their other friend Harry Osborn. Speaking of which, Harry is at first seen as Peter's geeky best friend, but being often neglected by his father, Norman Osborn, and goes to extreme lengths for attention at school, even if it means overusing some of his father's equipment. There's also Mary Jane Watson, the independent girl who, according to her voice actor, plays a major part in Peter's growth and maturation, which keeps him on the straight and narrow. There's the stereotypical bullying jock turned honest and slightly charismatic dichotomy Flash Thompson, Peter's eventual love interest Liz Allen, who at first resents Peter but soon accepts him as the person he really is, to Peter's overprotective yet caring and sweethearted Aunt May, to the grouchy, overly exaggerated yet child-caring dad head of Daily Bugle John Jameson, to the scientists unintentionally responsible for creating such disasters, to say the villains and the experiments Kurt and Martha Connors, the list goes on. I can't say any more about these characters since they'll go into spoiler territory, and I don't want this to go on too long, but I will say that most of them really give the emotional and heartbreaking dilemmas and plotlines for the series to build off of. And then there's the villains. Whether they be bad from the start or become evil through unfortunate circumstances, the series always knows how to demonstrate their beginnings, give time to know them before their uprising, and show what they plan to do with Spider-Man. Some range from thugs who get a power upgrade so they can be rid of Spider-Man once and for all, like Sandman, Vulture, Rhino, and the Enforcers, to those who got the worst luck at horrible accidents like Electro, Dr. Octopus, and Molten Man. While the Black Cat does feel more like a copycat Catwoman, get it? The Green Goblin at first seems obvious, but becomes more and more suspicious as the series goes on, down to where his reveal is the one you predicted at first becoming unpredictable. Wrap your heads around that. The only villains I don't care all that much for are Mysterio, since he can get easily defeated, Kraven the Hunter, since he only appears once or twice and that's it, and even Chameleon, since he's the most forgettable and least interesting of all of them. Though even with these baddies, the main antagonist is the head leading the crimes of New York, whether it be the big man called Tombstone, the master planner Dr. Octopus, or even Norman Osborn as the ruthless businessman chemist head of Oscorp Industries who makes shady deals with the big man like creating some of the supervillains. And then there's Peter's childhood friend Eddie Brock, who spends most of Season 1 as Peter's mentor around the lab he, Peter, and Gwen volunteer at, but as the progression flows through, he begins to lose his trust for Peter down to growing jealousy and hatred. And when the symbiote was taken and then thrown away by Peter after using it in some episodes, Eddie and the Black Goo formed together as Venom. Was that so hard, Spider-Man 3? However, as Eddie vows more and more to kill Peter/Spider-Man, he loses his sanity more and more. Theories have even stated that he suffered from severe depression, and at one point he attempted to kill himself when launching himself on one villain. I won't spoil anything else about him, but let's just say that the last we see of Eddie will make you kind of relieved, but mostly sad and heartbroken. And going on about the characters, not only are the characters so memorable and likable in their own way, but the voice acting is fantastic. Josh Keaton was clearly born to play Peter Parker. James Arnold Taylor always knows how to convey Harry through speech. Lacey Chabert, Vanessa Marshall, and Alana Ubach recreate the illusion that their characters are their own characters rather than just their voices, and they sound beautiful. Not to mention, the voices for the villains are perfectly casted, as they also recreate their characters vocally and emote with great deliveries and real depth whenever they need to be dramatic or threatening. Now it's time to talk about the animation. Despite obviously being TV quality, it really shines for what it is. The character designs are pretty simplistic, but I think it works by pulling off the great facial expressions and well done poses. Not to mention how the stylized look on the villains really complements how evil they look on the inside and outside. It gives off the feeling that it's animated in the style of a comic book, and I really like how it emphasizes the vibrant color stroke of the backgrounds and how it displays New York City. Yeah, the character animation is also kind of limited, but it makes up for it with the poses and action scenes with great fluidity and choreography. The only complaint I have with the animation is that most of the inking and painting isn't as impressive as it should be, with pretty flat-looking characters and visual effects much of the time. And the settings are pretty manufactured, with most just being in New York City, though I get that is the point. Even if it has a few low-key strokes, the animation is still good enough in its own right. But unfortunately, not everything is all hunky-dory with this show. And now it's time to mention my negatives with Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, in defense, I really don't blame the creators, as the series was meant to have more seasons, but it was cancelled before they could give off a proper conclusion. But that's where my biggest problem falls under. Many of Season 2's episodes are comparably mediocre to others, since most of the villains we knew from Season 1 become pretty repetitive as they fight Spidey, thus giving off fewer surprises here and there. It doesn't help that some of the weaker villains are introduced in the season, and the new boss after Tombstone, known as Silvermane, is nowhere near as threatening or intimidating as he should be. Not to mention, even Peter's personal life gets pretty cliched and underwhelming some of the time, from dealing with his private responsibilities to the troubled love triangle with Gwen and Liz. Even though it's obvious that it was just meant for this season, and even Spidey needed to take some hits along the way in order to succeed, This season just felt a little more convoluted and manufactured compared to Season 1, though we do see some great homages to school theater and drama. So overall, I'd have to say that Spectacular Spider-Man has to be the best adaptation of Spider-Man I've ever seen, even more than any of the movies. Even though some episodes are not as good as others and some of the villains are kind of forgettable, it successfully makes up for it with great writing, solid enough animation, likable and surprisingly complex characters, superb voice acting, and some of the darkest yet mature and adult themes I've ever seen in a superhero show, let alone any show. Despite the series only being 2 seasons long, it is a must-watch for anyone looking forward to seeing the web-slinging hero on his misadventures and why, with some very touching and suspenseful stories that you'd love to witness on the small screen. Considering there are people desperately trying to get the show back on the air, it would be so helpful if you could pitch in. And with that said, I will now give Spectacular Spider-Man an 8.5 out of 10. Even with a few missteps, it proves to be one hell of a smash for a TV show. And with that said, my work here is done.